Now, are you able to hear my voice? Yes, here I am. Hopefully, in just a minute, you will be able to hear my voice. This is very frustrating, trying to get all this worked out, but we hope and pray with the help of God that it will all work out. And if so, then we shall very soon be able to commence with our studies. So, are you now able to see me and hear me? If you can, we'll give thanks and praise to God and pray that this will continue. And as with yesterday, particularly since we've had some, unfortunately, a loss of time in beginning today's shiur, today's class, I would like again to go straight into our Mishnah study and have a substantial Mishnah class, and then following the Mishnah class, I will revert to the subject of the chapters of Isaiah, the suffering servant, and we'll be looking today at some very interesting material from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Ramchal, explaining the whole concept of the suffering of the tzaddik that has the power to atone for the people. But before we go on to that, today let us go into our Mishnah study and return to the first chapter of Mishnah Horayot, where yesterday we completed the first Mishnah, and now we come to the second Mishnah. The second Mishnah takes us into a discussion among the Tanaim of our Mishnah about an individual who performed a transgression that had been permitted by the Bet Din, who subsequently retracted from the decision. Well, let us formally start this class, and let me record this also in audio for the benefit of those who will be wanting to watch the archive, listen to the archived audio MP3. Shalom. Today, the 25th day of Tishrei of the year 5776, corresponding to the 27th of October of the year 2016, and I better do this again. I'm sorry, I think I got the dates wrong. Shalom, today, the 25th of Tishrei of the year 5777, corresponding to the year, to 26th of October 2016. And today we return to our study of the Mishnah of Horayot, where we come to the second Mishnah in the first chapter. And the question which our Mishnah is going to address today is whether the if the Bet Din had made a wrongful decision, which they subsequently wanted to subsequently retracted from and brought the necessary sacrifice as ordained by the Torah, and this will be discussed in our Mishnah. If the Bet Din retracted and a certain individual had not heard what was the new ruling of the Bet Din. So let us turn now to look at this Mishnah Bet. Horu Veis Din v'yod'u sheto. If the Bet Din had given their ruling, and subsequently they knew that they had made a mistake. V'chozru vohen. They turned back, they went back on their earlier decision, they retracted it. Bein sheheviu kaporoson, whether they had already brought their atonement offering in the temple, uven sheloi heviu kaporoson, or they had not yet brought the atonement offering, but they had retracted. V'holach ve'oso al pia, and a certain individual goes off and he carries out the transgression according to the earlier wrongful decision of the Beis Din. So we have a number of different views by the different Tanaim. Rabbi Shimon Poiter. Rabbi Shimon exempts the man from a sacrifice, even though the Bet Din had retracted their earlier opinion. Rabbi Shimon holds that even though he performs the transgression after their retraction, he is still exempt from bringing his own individual sin offering because he relied on the Beis Din. Now the question that comes up in the next opinion in the Mishnah is, well, could he have been expected to have discovered what is the latest news coming out of the Sanhedrin? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Sofik. Rabbi Eliezer says in this case it is a Sofik, a doubt whether the person would need to bring his own individual sin offering for that transgression, or whether, as Rabbi Shimon holds, he would be exempt. And now the Mishnah asks, well, Ve'ezehu Sofik, what is the question here? What is the doubt? Yoshav loy besoch beisoy chayav. If the person was sitting in his house at home, then according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would be liable to bring the offering. Why? Because he is in town. He should have been expected to hear the latest news about the debates in the Sanhedrin and should have received an update. And if he was at home and he could have been expected to receive an update, then when he transgressed, then he can no longer rightfully hang his transgression on the Bet Din because he should have known better, so he is liable to bring his own sin offering. But if he went to literally the state by the sea, that is a distant area where he may not have been expected to receive updates about the latest discussions in the Sanhedrin because it's far away, pater. If he did the transgression away out there, he's exempt from a sacrifice because he could not have been expected to hear that the Bet Din reversed their opinion, and he relied upon the earlier opinion that they had agreed to, and since he was relying on, then he is exempt from his own individual sin offering. He will be covered by the repentance of the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Akiva introduces another distinction. Rabbi Akiva, listening to the discussion between the two earlier authorities, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Moide ani vozeh shehu korov liftur min ha'chuyvo. I acknowledge in this case that this individual would be nearer to pator, nearer to exemption from his own individual sin offering, rather than being under the obligation to bring his sin offering. We don't yet know why Rabbi Akiva says this, but we shall presently find out. Omar loy ben Azai. Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva, Mai shno ze min hayoysh beveisoi. Rabbi Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva, what is the difference between this person who went off or was going off on a journey from the person that is sitting at home? And now the Mishnah brings Rabbi Akiva's answer. Somebody who was sitting at home could have heard that the Beis Din had retracted. in which case he should have updated himself on the latest news of the Bet Din, which he didn't, so he's going to have to bring his korban, his own private atonement sacrifice. This individual was unable to hear. Now, we heard earlier about the case of the person that went off and was already in a distant land and therefore could not have been expected to hear the latest news. According to our commentators and according to the Talmud, the last explanation of Rabbi Akiva is that even if the person is still at home but is about to leave on a journey, he can be considered not responsible if he's not heard the latest news from the Beis Din, because he is busy with his preparations for his coming journey, and therefore he is in the same category as somebody who already left for a far distant place. This is before the days of instant internet and social networking and email, so the person could not have been expected to hear the latest news of Bet Din, even if he had not left home, but he was on the verge of going away. So now we come to the third Mishnah of Horayot, chapter 1, Mishnah 3, and now we come to the nitty-gritty. What case of wrongful ruling by the Beis Din brings the person to be exempt from a sacrifice and covered by the sacrifice of the Bet Din? What would their ruling have to be to cause them to have to bring this special sin offering, which, as we saw yesterday, is set forth in Leviticus chapter 4 in the second section, starting in verse 13 of Leviticus chapter 4, if all of the assembly of Israel went astray. In what particular ruling would this have to be? It would not be just a ruling in a regular prohibition of the Torah that does not carry the penalty of karet. It has to be in a prohibition of the Torah that carries with its transgression the penalty of karet. So here the Mishnah will begin to define for us. Hoiru Beis Din la'akor es kol aguf. If the Bet Din gave a ruling that is going to uproot the entire body of the prohibition, for example, Omru ein nido batoiro, if they said there is no concept of menstrual impurity in the Torah, they flew in the face of explicit verses in the Torah. Ein Shabbos batoiro, if they say the Sabbath is nothing to do with, is not a prohibition in the Torah. You can ride your car, you can turn on your electricity. If the Beis Din said all the stringencies of Shabbat are not there, not to be observed. Ein avodah zorah batoiro, if they said there's no idolatry prohibited by the Torah, go ahead and do what you want. Hare elu peturin, they are exempt from this sacrifice. They're obviously flying directly in the face of the written Torah, and by definition, their authority is undermined by this total defiance of what is written in the Torah, and the sacrifice that is written about in Leviticus chapter 4 is not applicable to them. Now, the Mishnah continues to specify when they would be liable. Hoiru levatil mikzos ulekayim mikzos. If they ruled to nullify a part of the mitzvah, while at the same time establishing and maintaining the other main part of the mitzvah. Harei elu chayovim, they will be liable to the sin offering. This teaching is a teaching received by tradition, and it's alluded to in the biblical verse in a very interesting way. Here you have before you on your screen now the text of Leviticus Vayikra, chapter 4, verse 13. If all of the assembly of Israel go astray, Im kol adas Yisrael yishku, if all the assembly of Israel go astray, the words in the Torah then continue, v'ne'elam dovor, there shall be concealed a matter, me'ene hakol, from the eyes of the assembly. The eyes of the assembly are the Sanhedrin. Well, in the Torah scroll, the words are written without vowels or cantillation marks for one thing. And if these two words, ne'elam dovor, if they were run into each other without a space between them, you could actually read the mem, the last letter of the word ne'elam, was concealed. You could read that mem as being connected to the word that follows, dovor, a matter, a thing. Ne'elam me dovor, if there was concealed from them from a thing that is part of one of the commandments of Hashem that may not be performed. This is the allusion in the verse to the concept that only if they ruled to nullify part of the mitzvah while maintaining the rest of it would they be liable to the sacrifice. And now the Mishnah explains, gives us examples. Amru yesh nido b'TORAH. If they said there is the concept of nido, menstrual impurity, in the Torah, that we acknowledge, it's written explicitly also in the book of Leviticus at the end of the portion of Metzorah in chapter 15 of Leviticus, the whole concept of menstrual impurity. And there is also in the same section discussion of the kind of impurity that is clings to a woman who has seen blood from below outside of her regular menstrual cycle. There is the concept of nida, that every month a menstruating woman will see her menstruation in her period. But besides that, the Torah also deals with a case of a woman that saw a show of blood outside of her period. And in that case, if she saw the show of blood for just one day, the Torah indicates to us that she has to make a count of days. If she saw a flow of blood outside her menstrual period for 3 days or more continuously, or 3 stains on 3 separate days, then she has to make a count of 7 days clean before she can immerse in the mikveh, the ritual pool, and be purified for her husband. Because the Torah prohibits intimate relations between husband and wife when the woman is in her menstrual period or has seen a show of blood, all the while that she is not immersed in the mikveh. Now, if the woman outside of her menstrual period sees a show of blood for only 1 day, she need not after that count 7 full days without seeing any blood to be able to purify for her husband. According to the law we have received, the day following the day on which she saw the blood, she has to check that she has no flow of blood at all on that day, and then she may after that immerse in the mikveh and she is permitted to her husband. And that is what our Mishnah is dealing with here. If the Sanhedrin Amru yesh nido b'TORAH, having relations with his wife during that time, avol abo al shomeres yom keneged yom poter, but they rule that somebody who comes upon, who has relations with a woman that is shomeres yom, she's guarding a day of pure, stainless, from all blood, keneged yom, corresponding to the previous day that she saw some blood. If the Beis Din ruled that somebody who has relations with her on that day that is supposed to be clean, that he is pater, that he is exempt from the prohibition. That would be an example where they have not uprooted the whole Mishnah, the whole mitzvah, the whole prohibition, because they acknowledge there is a prohibition of intimate relations with a nida, menstrual woman during her period, but they are saying that if she did not see blood on the day that she's supposed to be guarding herself, if he still has relations with her, if they said that he will be pater, that is an example of an erroneous ruling. The second example our Mishnah brings, Yesh Shabbos Bat-Torah. If they said, yes, we agree, it's obvious the commandment not to desecrate the Shabbos is contained in the Torah. The Torah clearly says you shall do no malacha, and we have our tradition of what are the 39 prohibited labors of Shabbat, that if a person violates them without a due warning, he will be liable to karet, to the penalty of excision through flagrant violation, even without a warning. If they ruled, yes, we agree with all that, aval, but hamoitzi mireshus hayochid, the reshus or rabim, but if somebody were to take something out from the private domain, namely from their home or another enclosed residential space, a home or a courtyard, if you were to remove something from the home to the Reshus Rabim, to the public domain, for example, to a street, that he will be pater, he will be exempt from the penalty of karet. He would be allowed to. He would not be liable to the punishment if he were to do that. That would be another example of acknowledging there is the mitzvah of Shabbat, but nullifying a small part of it. Now, the commentators tell us that an example of this specific ruling would be, as those familiar with the laws of Shabbat know, the carrying from a private domain to a public domain or vice versa is a fundamental prohibition of the Shabbat, unless there is an eruv, a joining together of all the homes in the area to make it into one private domain, but otherwise it is forbidden to carry out from the private home out into the street and vice versa. Now, if the Bet Din ruled that, okay, you can't carry out, but if you threw something out from one domain to the other, that will be pater, he will be exempt. That would also be an example of maintaining the guf, the main body of the Shabbat prohibitions, but partially relaxing one of them. That would be another example of a ruling where if the Beis Din realized they had gone wrong, they would have to bring a sacrifice. Now a third example. Yef avodah zarah bat-Torah. If they say, yes, we agree that there is a prohibition of strange service, namely the worship of idols in the Torah. Avol amishtachave potur. But if they rule that somebody who prostrates before an idol will be exempt, or if he bowed down before the idol, that will be exempt, that bringing a sacrifice, for example, they might agree would be forbidden, or doing other forms of service. But if they said a simple prostration, we permitted, he will be exempt from the prohibition. Hare elu chayovin. That Sanhedrin would be liable to bring the sacrifice of atonement when they realize their mistake. Shenemar, as it says in the verse which we looked at a moment earlier, Deuteronomy chapter 4, V'ne'elam dovor. If a particular thing, a particular part of the Mishnah, a part of the prohibition was concealed from them, Dover, one item, one matter, v'loi kol haguf, not the whole body of the commandment. So this is what our Mishnah has to say now about, so far, about which wrongful rulings would make the Sanhedrin liable to bring a sin offering. And our Mishnah now leaves that subject and goes back to the case of people who knew that the Beis Din had gone wrong, but nevertheless went ahead and did it. Mishnah 4, Mishnah Dalet, Hoiru Beis Din, if the court gave their ruling, V'yoda echod mehen shetou, if one of the Sanhedrin knew that they had made a mistake, V'omer lohen toyin atem, he says to them, you are in error, you've gone astray. Oy shelo hoyo muflo shel Beis Din sham, or if the mufla, the most exceptional, the most outstanding member of the Beis Din was not present at the time of the discussion. Or if one of the Sanhedrin that had sat in on that session, who had been counted in, if he was a ger tzedek that did not come from Israelite parentage, if he was a proselyte, a convert, and his parents were not Israelite, Oy mamzer, if one of the Sanhedrin was a mamzer, that is a child that is the issue of one of the incest unions that the Torah forbids. Oy nosin, if the person was in the category of natin, who is not a member of the covenant. The nesinim were those subject people such as the Gibeonites, who were the Canaanites, who surrendered to Joshua at the time of the entry of Israel into the land, as described in the book of Joshua. And subsequently, they were not admitted into the Kahal, into the assembly of Israel, to intermarry because of their deception of the princes of Israel in the time of Joshua. They were given over to the temple service, and that is the meaning of the word nosin, one given over to temple service. They were not eligible, even if the person was an outstanding Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar. He would not be eligible to serve in the Sanhedrin. Or if it was an old man that had never had children. These are 4 categories of people who cannot serve in the great Sanhedrin. The last one, the elder that has no children, the old person that has no children, is deemed to be lacking in compassion since he has no experience in bringing up children. So if one of these 4 categories enumerated above was part of those that voted in the debate in the Sanhedrin on this issue, Harei elu paturim, they are exempt from having to bring this sacrifice. Shene'emar kan edo, because in the passage in Leviticus chapter 4, the Torah uses the word eda. The word eda, the assembly, the Sanhedrin are called the einei or eda, the eyes of the assembly. So in this portion of Leviticus chapter 4, they're called Edo. Later on in the Torah, the word Edo is also used of those who are fit for ruling. The use of the term Edo referred to in the Mishnah here is in Book of Numbers, chapter 11, where the Torah is talking about the leading people in the assembly who were fit to be the Sanhedrin. Ma Edo ha'amur el halon, just like the expression Edo, the assembly, used down below in Book of Numbers, ad sheyu chulam re'uyin lehero, Moses was commanded to bring into the assembly of 70 elders, only those who were fit for Horayot, fit to rule in the Sanhedrin. Af Edo Ha'amurakan, likewise the Edo, the assembly referred to in Leviticus chapter 4, refers to Ad sheyu kulam re'uim lahiro, until they will all be fit to give rulings. So now we start entering into the specifics of which sacrifice must be brought. Hoiru veistin shoigigin. If the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, gave their ruling unwittingly, they did not realize they made the mistake. V'yasu chol hakol shoigigin. And if all of the assembly also followed the ruling of the Sanhedrin, shoigigin, in a state of unawareness, they did not realize it was wrong. Mevin por. That's the case where, as in Leviticus chapter 4, the Sanhedrin would have to bring the ox prescribed there in the text. Mezidin ve'asu shoigigin. But if the Sanhedrin were willfully transgressing, they knew very well they were wrong. They still gave the ruling, but the people carried out the ruling in a state of unawareness and ignorance. Mavian kispa useiro. In that case, the individual would have to, all the people who made the error would have to bring the lamb or the goat offering prescribed for individual sinners. Shoigigin, if the Beis Din were unaware of their error. Ve'asu mezidin, but the people who carried out the forbidden action did so flagrantly. In other words, they were aware that the Beis Din were wrong and they nevertheless did it. Hari'elu peturin, these are exempt from the sacrifice. And with this we shall conclude today's study of the Mishnah. My dear friends, I am truly sorry about the technical issues we've been having today as we had yesterday, and I'm still not fully aware of why in scientific cause and effect terms it's been happening. This, on another level, this seems to be the forces fighting against us. I'm going to take a very short break, and I'll be back just in a few moments with a discussion on our text in Isaiah. And there I would like to address the question that was put to me earlier, or the issue that was raised earlier by Dawn about the mystery of Israel suffering for the other nations. So I will be back in just a very few moments, and in the meantime, let's have an interval with some music. Shalom again. Let us now return to our studies today and return to the subject of Isaiah's suffering servant in chapters 52 and 53 of the prophecy of Isaiah. It is my hope and my plan in our classes next week to look at the interpretation of the Holy Zohar on this section. But in order for us to be able to approach the Zohar, it will be preferable for us to have a look into the subject from the perspective of more a mainstream and known and accepted authorities, and this will enable us to understand better what we are hearing in the Holy Zohar. And the place I'd like to start with today is one of the, to my mind, the truly classic texts, the text of the Derech Hashem, the way of God, by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. I first discovered this book when I was beginning on my path back in 1977, and the book had just come out in those days, this remarkable translation with detailed commentary notes by the late Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who passed away in 1983. And Rabbi Kaplan was, I would say, the outstanding translator and expositor of the Kabbalistic and mystical sides of Torah, as well as an expositor of many other aspects of Torah in his time. And his works today are well worth studying because he is true authority. He himself had come into the Torah community from the outside at in his very early teens and was a true genius. He actually worked for the United States government as a research physicist, and besides that, he produced some of the most outstanding translations of Kabbalistic works and of the text of the Torah. His translation of the Living Torah, his translation of the commentary on the Torah of the Sephardic commentator Me'am Loez. But the work Derech Hashem, the way of God, is the best, in my opinion, one-volume explanation of what the Torah teaches us to believe. And in the second section of the book, which is called Providence, in the third section of the third chapter in section 2 of the book, which is called Individual Providence, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto addresses the subject of suffering. And here he is encapsulating, is distilling the wisdom and the insights into this mystery of suffering, whose original sources are to be found, for example, in the book of Job, in Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, in the book of Proverbs, and in other allusions through the prophets. And first and foremost among those prophetic passages is our passage in Isaiah chapters 52 and 53 on the suffering servant. And here is what Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto has to say on this subject. And here we will, I hope, begin to see why the righteous of Israel atone for the less righteous of Israel and also for the nations of the world. Because Israel have been chosen as the Mamlechet Kohanim, in the words of Exodus, just prior to the giving of the Torah, when God calls Moses to bring Israel into the covenant, and he invites Israel to be the Mamlechet Kohanim, the kingdom of Kohanim, those who serve God. And the service required by God can take many different forms. And Ramchal writes here, when the highest wisdom considered everything needed to rectify the human race and make it into the perfected community, the highest wisdom saw that this goal would be furthered if some people could benefit others and help them attain a place in this community. So one of the deep mysteries of the creation, that there are rich and there are poor. There are those who have what to give, others that are in need of receiving. And this is a principle across the creation. So Ramchal continues, the rule that the community of the future world would be restricted only to those who attain perfection in their own right is therefore not absolute. For it was also decreed that an individual can reach a level where he can partake of perfection and be included in this community as the result of his association with a more worthy individual. The only difference is that he will remain on a lower level, since he is not included in this community in his own right, but only through association with another. This can be seen as one of the foundations of Hasidism, where the Hasid, the follower, attached himself to the tzaddik, to the righteous. So continues Ramchal, the only ones who are cast aside completely from perfection, therefore, are those who are not worthy of it at all, neither through their own merit, nor through association with another. Because of this, the number who are saved from annihilation and allowed the ultimate bliss is maximized. And this fits in with God's goodness that desires to bestow goodness wherever possible to every possible recipient. Continues Ramchal, those who cause others to partake in the world to come will definitely be the foremost in that community. They will be the leaders, while those who enter by virtue of their association with them will be beholden and dependent on them. In order for this to be possible, all men were originally bound to each other, as our sages teach us. In the phrase, all Israel are responsible for one another. As a result of this, each individual is bound to everyone else, and no person is counted separately. God's attribute of good is the stronger, however, and if the guilt for sin is shared by others, this must certainly be true of the merit associated with good deeds. Now here is the section where Ramchal speaks about the subject of suffering. As a result of this principle, he says, suffering and pain may be imposed on a tzaddik, a righteous person, as an atonement for his entire generation. The tzaddik must then accept this suffering with love for the benefit of his generation, just as he accepts the suffering imposed upon him for his own sake. In doing so, he benefits his generation by atoning for it, and at the same time is himself elevated to a very great degree. For a tzaddik such as this is made into one of the leaders in the community of the future world. Such suffering also includes cases where a tzaddik suffers because his entire generation deserves great punishments bordering on annihilation, but is spared via the tzaddik's suffering. In atoning for his generation through his suffering, this tzaddik saves these people in this world and also greatly benefits them in the world to come. He continues, In addition, there is a special higher type of suffering that comes to a tzaddik who is even greater and more highly perfected than the ones discussed above. This suffering comes to provide the help necessary to bring about the chain of events leading to the ultimate perfection of mankind as a whole. According to the original plan, the sequence of worldly events required that man undergo at least some suffering before both he and the world could attain perfection. This was required by the very fact that one of the basic concepts of man's predicament was that God should hold back his light and hide his presence. This became all the more necessary as a result of the corruption and spiritual damage caused by people's many sins, which held the good back even more and caused God's presence to be all the more hidden. The world and everything in it are therefore in a degraded evil state and require that God's unfathomable wisdom bring about numerous chains of events to attain their rectification. Among the most important elements of this sequence is the requirement that man be punished for his wickedness until the attribute of justice is satisfied. God arranged matters, however, so that select, perfect individuals could rectify things for others. As discussed earlier in the book, the attribute of justice therefore relates to them, to these special individuals, rather than to the rest of the world in general. Individuals such as these, however, are themselves perfect and are therefore worthy only of good. The only reason they suffer is because of others. And the attribute of justice must therefore be satisfied with a small amount of suffering on their part, as with a large amount on the part of those who actually sinned. So when the suffering is taken on by the tzaddik, the amount of suffering that tzaddik goes through will itself atone for the very much greater suffering that the majority would have to go through if the attribute of justice could only be satisfied through the majority. Here, the attribute of justice has to make do with less. Beyond that, the merit and power of these tzaddikim is also increased because of such suffering, and this gives them even greater ability to rectify the damage of others. They can therefore not only rectify their own generation, but can also correct all the spiritual damage done from the beginning, from the time of the very first sinners. It is obvious that individuals such as these will ultimately be the foremost leaders in the perfected community and the ones who are the very closest to God. Well, in this passage from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, I think that we can firstly see how it is an integral part of the Torah worldview that tzaddikim might suffer to atone for others. Now, the difference between this and the teachings promoted in the name of Christianity, that one person could atone for all humanity, it's clear that Ramchal is telling us that there are certain tzaddikim, and not just a single individual, but a number of particularly outstanding righteous people that across generations might atone for their generation, and in the case of some might actually be making repairs and rectifications for flaws that came through sins much earlier in history. But what we are seeing is that the Torah does not tell us that there's any one individual that through his suffering alone can simply take everything off everybody else. This is not the concept. Clearly, if we examine carefully the words of Ramchal, we will see the true and original Torah teaching on this subject. And it's in the light of this explanation of Ramchal of the place of the suffering of one individual in the overall divine providence. It's in this context that we can far better take another look at Isaiah chapters 52 to 53 and see how all this is playing out actually in the words of Isaiah. Because what Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was doing in the 1720s and 30s, and if you do know something about the life of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, he was a child prodigy who wrote his book on the future temple at the age of 22 and was being persecuted left, right, and center by rabbis across Europe, and nevertheless maintained his head above the water. He certainly knew what suffering is all about, and he had eventually to move from where he was. He had to move from Italy to Holland before eventually traveling to the land of Israel, where he died of the plague. He certainly knew all about suffering, and Ramchal was drawing out from the ancient sources, from the allusions in the book of Job, which I hope we shall be studying, God willing, later this Torah year, and allusions also contained in verses through the Torah, and also traditions received by the sages of Israel. So Ramchal is drawing out all of these ideas and expressing them in his book, which is elucidating and presenting the principles of the Torah worldview in a condensed form. So when we look back to Isaiah chapters 52 to 53, which are one of the foremost sources on this subject, we clearly see that there is the picture of the righteous individual who, as the text specifically states, is atoning for other people. And we shall be going back through the text a little later on in this series in the course of next week. And what we shall see is that the text itself can be read on a number of levels. The text can be read on the level of it's about Israel, how, as Ramchal explained to us in this section, part of the people come to the realization that the tzaddikim that they had earlier rejected were actually atoning for the whole people. So that's one level of analysis, that we're looking at the payment paid by the tzaddik to let others off the hook of suffering, others in Israel. But in a more global perspective, it comes out from the very same verses and the same chapters in Isaiah that at the end of time the nations will begin to wake up and see how wrong the nations were in their view of the righteous of Israel. We're not saying that if Isaiah chapters 52 to 53 is about Israel and the nations, we're not saying that it's about all of Israel, including the sinners of Israel, who somehow are atoning for all of the rest of the world. We are looking at Israel as being essentially the truly righteous of Israel, those who are following the path of Hashem in their service, and who, as we shall see, it's been many of the righteous of Israel that have been heartlessly persecuted for thousands of years. Also in our studies next week, I'll be looking at part of the liturgy of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, in the Ashkenazic rite, where we have a liturgical poem about the terrible martyrdoms of 10 outstanding tzaddikim in the period of the destruction of the Second Temple and its aftermath, including Rabbi Akiva, whose skin was clawed with iron forks before he was burned to death, and the terrible fates of other companions of his who are our leading sages in the Holy Mishnah. And it's quite clear that those 10 known as the Haruge Malchut, who were put to death by the Romans, were making atonement for very, very deep issues, as we discuss when we come to that passage. And we'll see even more so how when we come to the Zohar, how the Zohar will explain to us that the true suffering servant, besides all the other levels of the martyrs of all the generations and of all the other of the tzaddikim, but the true suffering servant is really none other than Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. And we shall see that the suffering of Moses needs to be understood for what it is when we come to the Zohar to understand what was actually imposed on this tzaddik, because it is far from apparent from a simple reading of the Torah what exactly the suffering of Moses is. We shall come to that with the Zohar, but here we shall see that truly the suffering of the tzaddik atones both for Israel and also for the nations, and also for the entire creation. But with God's help, we will come to that in next week's discussions. I would like to wish you now a Shabbat Shalom, to remind you that we will be having studies next week on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday with the help of God. And please do check out the times, people in different locations, of our classes next week. The reason being that Israel, this coming Saturday night to Sunday, turn our clocks back to winter time, whereas in North America, the clocks only go back a week later. Well, now I will be broadcasting from Israel according to our new clock an hour later, in other words, at our usual time for those of you in North America. And I will endeavor to put on the Azamra schedule page the corresponding times for the coming week's sessions in different parts of the world. But those in North America, in Canada, and United States, the clock time of your classes next week will not change from what it's been this week. The change will only come about after my return from London, God willing, and after our 2-week break coming up, starting on November the 6th for 2 weeks. But by then, I will be notifying you in my Kollel email of changes in the schedule. So with that, my dear friends, I would like to wish you Shabbat Shalom and Vorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat. And I look forward to being with you, God willing, this coming Sunday for more in our Mishnah and more on our studies of the Tanakh. Shalom and Shabbat Shalom.